My wife cheated on me with a trainer, but in response I decided to send her and her lover a video of me working hard in bed with their friend. My wife, Sarah, and I have been married for 8 years. She's always been full of energy, the kind of person who lights up any room she walks into. A few months ago, she convinced me to join her at a salsa class. She wanted us to have a hobby together, something to keep the spark alive. I'll admit, I wasn't thrilled at first, but the way her face lit up when we danced made the awkward footwork and hip movements worth it. The studio we went to was small but vibrant. It had mirrors on every wall, brightly colored lights hanging from the ceiling, and the faint smell of wood polish mixed with sweat. Sarah hit the ground running, picking up on things faster than anyone else in the group, while I tripped over my own feet like a toddler learning to walk. She laughed at it, encouraged me, and waved me off, saying, "It's all part of the fun." Then there was Ian, the instructor. In his early 30s, tall, tanned, and built like a dancer who lived at the gym. He was always impeccably dressed, in form-fitting shirts and pants that seemed designed to show off his physique. His movements were fluid and effortless, and Sarah was immediately impressed with his teaching style. I could tell she admired his talent, but so did everyone else. Ian had a charisma that filled the room. At first, I didn't think much of it. He was professional, charming, and attentive to all of his students. But as the weeks went on, I began to notice the little things. During class, Ian would often team up with Sarah to demonstrate steps. It made sense, of course. She was one of the most skilled dancers in the group, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling when his hand lingered on her waist a second too long, or when their laughter over a misstep seemed to go on longer than it should have. One evening, after class, Sarah invited us to stay for extra practice. Ian offered to help, saying he had some time to spare before his next private lesson. I shrugged, telling myself it wasn't a big deal, but as I stood there watching them dance together, I couldn't help but feel like an awkward third wheel. Ian twirled her gracefully around the floor while I fiddled around in the corner, pretending to stretch. The turning point came about a month later. Sarah started going to the studio more often, once, twice, sometimes 3 times a week. "I just want to get better," she'd say, smiling as she laced up her dancing shoes. I wanted to believe her. Maybe it was innocent, but my gut was telling me otherwise. One evening, I decided to surprise her. I left work early, grabbed her favorite takeout, and headed to the studio. When I got there, the main room was dark, but I could hear music coming from the small rehearsal room at the back. I quietly made my way there. Through the window, I saw Ian and Sarah. They were rehearsing a complex routine, their bodies moving in perfect sync. She looked so alive, so radiant. He twirled her as he fell, and she laughed, the sound echoing through the closed door. It wasn't the same laugh she'd heard at home. I stepped back, unsure what to feel. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe it was just the intensity of the dance. But part of me couldn't ignore how close they seemed, how much joy she radiated when she was with him in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. I said nothing that night, but I began to pay more attention. The next week, Sarah came home late, saying she'd stayed to watch Ian rehearse with another student. I asked her about it casually, and she smiled, waving it off. "He's such a talented dancer," she said, almost wistfully. Then she caught herself. "But he's also a great teacher. You should hang around with me after class more often." A few days later, while she was in the shower, her phone vibrated. I wasn't trying to pry, but a notification popped up on the screen. "Ian, thanks again for last night. That really helped." I stared at it for a moment before guilt washed over me. I told myself it was probably harmless, something about dancing. Still, my stomach clenched. Why hadn't she mentioned that? Another time, I found myself home alone on a Friday night. Sarah had gone to what she called a casual get-together for some of the studio's members. When I asked if I should join, she waved it off, saying, "It's mostly advanced dancers, and I don't want you to feel left out." Out of curiosity, I decided to check the studio's Instagram page. Sure enough, there were photos from the evening, several of them of Sarah and Ian, always standing a little too close, smiling brightly. In one, he had his arm casually around her shoulder. That's when I started to wonder if I was being paranoid, or if there was something more to their connection. I started to overthink everything. Every smile, every joke they shared during class, every extra workout. I hadn't met her face to face yet. Maybe I was imagining things, overemphasizing the situation due to my own insecurities. I decided to dig a little deeper, starting small. One evening, I casually mentioned to Sarah that I might stop by the studio after work to watch her rehearse. She froze for half a second before cracking a smile. "Oh, you don't have to," she said quickly. "Just practicing today." Really boring. I wasn't happy with her reaction. If you had nothing to hide, why would you act like that? I kept my cool anyway, telling her I'd probably skip the class. But the thought of not going had been nagging at me all day. I needed to see for myself what was going on. I left work early that night and parked a block away from the studio. It felt ridiculous, sitting in my car like a private detective. But sometimes, when you're desperate for answers, you do things you never thought you'd do. The front windows of the studio were lit up, revealing groups of dancers in the main room. Sarah wasn't there. I decided to go inside. Inside, I was greeted by a woman behind the desk with a bright smile. Her name tag said Melanie. She had the friendly but curious energy of someone who probably knew everything about everyone. "Hello," I said, trying to sound casual. "I'm Sarah's husband. I just stopped by to see how she was doing." "Oh, Sarah's wonderful. She's been working so hard lately," Melanie said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "She's with Ian right now, practicing in the back room." I kept my expression neutral, but my pulse quickened. "Is that normal? I mean, private lessons?" Melanie shrugged. "For someone as good as Sarah? Sure. Ian really focuses on his best students." Best students? Sarah had been dancing for months. I mumbled a polite thank you and walked deeper into the studio. The door to the back room was closed, but I could hear faint music through the walls. I debated opening it, but I hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if I walked in and embarrassed Sarah for no reason? Instead, I decided to leave. As I was leaving, Melanie called out to me. "You should come to the exhibition next week. Sarah and Ian are speaking. It's going to be amazing." She winked, as if we were sharing some kind of inside joke, but it only made me more anxious. The next day, I couldn't concentrate on my work. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined Sarah and Ian twirling and laughing in that private room. I needed a plan, someone who could give me an unbiased perspective. That's when I thought of Josh. Josh is one of my oldest friends, a laid-back, no-nonsense guy who always tells it like it is. He's also the type who enjoys a little drama, so I knew he'd be all for it. I called him and explained everything. "So you want me to spy on your wife and her dance instructor?" he asked, clearly amused. "Dude, do you really think she's cheating on you?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I need someone who isn't emotionally involved to test it." Josh agreed, and 2 days later we hatched a plan. He would attend the studio's next beginner class, posing as a new student. His mission? Observe Ian and Sarah, see if their interactions were out of character. That night, Josh sent me a WhatsApp message. "Josh, bro, Ian is exactly like you described. Dude looks like he stepped out of a cologne commercial." Me, "What about Sarah?" "Josh, she's here. They're doing a demo together." So far, so standard. I waited, heart pounding, as the minutes ticked by. Finally, Josh sent another message. "Josh, okay, that's interesting." After the demo, Ian told everyone to band together, but Sarah didn't. She stayed with him. Me, "That's not weird, right? He's a teacher." Josh, "Sure, but the way they talk? It's close. More than just a close teacher-student relationship." When Josh finally called me after class, he sounded more serious than I expected. "Look, I don't know if there's anything going on," he said, "but Ian's definitely into Sarah. It's not subtle." His words hit me harder than I expected. I thanked him and hung up, unsure of what to do next. Had I read too much into this? Or was my gut trying to tell me something? I decided to move on. The show Melanie had mentioned was coming up, and I figured it would be a great opportunity to see it all in person. Sarah had been rehearsing nonstop, staying home until late at night. When I asked her about the show, she seemed excited but wouldn't give any details. "You'll see," she said with a sly smile. "It's a surprise." On the night of the showcase, I arrived at the studio early and took a seat in the front row. The room was buzzing with energy as the dancers fluttered around in their glittering costumes, and the audience whispered excitedly. I spotted Melanie at the door and waved. She waved back enthusiastically, mouthing, "You're going to love this." When it was time for Sarah and Ian to perform, the lights dimmed and a slow, sultry tune began to play. Sarah came out first, looking stunning in a tight red dress. Ian followed, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. As the dance began, I couldn't take my eyes off them. Their movements were fluid and hypnotic, their chemistry undeniable. The way Ian looked at her, the way she smiled back, it was as if they were the only two people in the room. After the performance, the crowd erupted in applause. Sarah and Ian took a bow, and I clapped my hands, even though my chest was tight. Melanie caught my eye from across the room and gave me a thumbs up, as if to say, "See? I told you she was amazing." Later, as Sarah and I walked to the car, I tried to keep my voice casual. "You and Ian looked great out there." She beamed. "Thank you. I've been working really hard." I'd say, "You two seem really in sync." She hesitated just a moment, barely noticeably. "Well, we've been practicing a lot. It's part of the routine." Her answer sounded rehearsed, as if she'd been preparing for this conversation. I didn't press her, but inside I felt more conflicted than ever. The next day, I called Josh again. "I need your help," I said. "One last thing." He groaned. "Dude, you're really making me work." "I'll owe you forever," I promised. We decided to follow Ian after his next private session with Sarah. It was extreme, but I was desperate for clarity. Josh and I parked outside the studio that evening, keeping our distance as the dancers filed out. Around 9 p.m., Ian showed up, with Sarah hot on his heels. They were laughing about something as they walked to their cars. My chest tightened as I watched her wave goodbye and drive away. But Ian didn't. Instead, he got into his car and headed in the opposite direction. Josh and I followed him through the quiet streets until he pulled up to a small cafe. He walked inside and met another woman. Josh looked at me. "Well, that's unexpected." I sat back, relieved, but even more confused. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it really was just dancing. But then why couldn't I shake the feeling that something was still wrong? And then I saw who the woman was. It was Melanie. The next day, I decided to talk to Melanie. She was chatty and seemed to know everything that was going on in the studio. If anyone could give me a clearer picture of what was going on, it was her. When I walked into the studio after work, Melanie greeted me with her usual cheerful smile. "Hey, Sarah's not here right now," she said, mistaking my presence for another attempt to surprise her wife. "I'm not here for her," I said, lowering my voice. "Can we talk somewhere private?" Her eyes widened slightly, curiosity lighting up her face. "Sure, let's go to the break room." As we sat down, I leaned in, trying to keep my voice even. "Melanie, I need to know the truth. Have you noticed anything off between Ian and Sarah?" She hesitated, her cheerful demeanor faltering. "Off? What do you mean?" "You know what I mean," I pressed. "Are they closer than they should be?" Melanie glanced around the room, as if checking to see if anyone else could hear us. Then she sighed. "Okay, look. Ian's a flirt, always has been. He's charming, and he knows it. Sometimes, yes, I've noticed that he pays more attention to Sarah. But that's Ian. He does that with a lot of people. Has he ever crossed the line with you?" I asked, my stomach twisting at the thought. She laughed softly. "Oh, he tried. A couple of times, actually. But I shut him up. Told him I wasn't interested in anything more than friendship. After that, he reluctantly backed off." Her words brought a wave of relief. Maybe Ian's behavior was just part of his personality, nothing more. Maybe I was making a big deal out of it. And yet, a part of me couldn't quite shake the doubts. "Thanks, Melanie," I said, standing up. "I appreciate your honesty." She gave me a sympathetic smile. "Hey, I'm sure it's okay. I think Sarah really does love you." I nodded, forcing a smile back. But the pit in my stomach remained. I worked late that night, trying to distract myself. By the time I got home, it was about 10 p.m. The house was dark except for the dim light of the living room lamp. I parked in the driveway, grabbed my bag, and walked to the door, my keys jingling in my hand. But when I opened it, I froze. There they were, Sarah and Ian, right there on the couch, and I was suffocating. Are you kidding me? I yelled, my voice shaking the walls. They both tried to cover themselves, Sarah's face a mask of shock and guilt. Ian, smug, had the nerve to try to speak. Dude, let me explain. With a sneer. I didn't let him finish. My rage got the better of me. I lunged at him, pulled him off the couch, and punched him square in the jaw. He staggered back, clutching his face, but I wasn't done. I punched him again, this time knocking him down. Sarah screamed, trying to pull me away from him, but I pushed her away. You think you can just barge into my house, into my life, and do this? I screamed, my fists raining down on Ian. He managed to wriggle out from under me, grabbing his shirt and running for the door. I didn't pursue him. Instead, I turned my rage on the room, smashing a lamp, knocking over a coffee table, and sending a framed photograph of Sarah and me collapsed on the floor. Sarah was sobbing, her hands shaking as she struggled to pull her clothes back on. I'm sorry, she managed to say. It's just the way it is. Save it, I spat out coldly. I don't want to hear another word from you. I stormed out, slamming the door. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for the phone and dialed Josh. The line rang and rang, but he didn't pick up. I tried again. Nothing. Frustrated, I scrolled through my contacts and settled on Melanie. I hesitated for a moment, then pressed call. She answered on the second ring. Hello? It's me, I said, my voice hoarse. I need to talk to someone. Can I come in? There was a pause, and then she said quietly, yes, of course. When I arrived at Melanie's apartment, she opened the door with a worried expression. What happened? She asked, stepping aside to let me in. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I went into her kitchen, grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the counter, and poured 2 glasses. She joined me at the table, her eyes searching my face for answers. I got them, I finally said in a low voice. Sarah and Ian. At my place. Melanie's eyes widened. Oh, no. I'm so sorry. We began drinking, the whiskey burning my throat. I told her everything. How long I'd suspected. How I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. How it had all come crashing down tonight. She listened silently, her expression a mixture of sympathy and anger. As the night wore on, the drinks flowed. The more we drank, the freer our conversation became. We laughed bitterly at Ian's audacity, at Sarah's betrayal. At some point, the laughter died down, replaced by something heavier, something intense. You deserved better, Melanie said softly. So much better. Her hand touched mine, and I looked up, meeting her gaze. There was a moment of silence, full of unspoken tension. Then, without thinking, I leaned down and kissed her. What started as a brief, hesitant kiss quickly turned into something more. We stumbled over to her couch, our hands fumbling with each other's clothes. It was messy, fueled by anger and heartbreak, but neither of us cared. Somewhere in the haze, Melanie grabbed her phone and pressed record. This is for them, she whispered, her voice dripping with defiance. The next morning, I woke up on Melanie's couch, my head pounding and my body tangled up with hers. The events of the night before came rushing back, and I groaned, running a hand through my hair. What had I done? Melanie stirred next to me, her eyes fluttering. She looked at me, and for a moment neither of us said anything. Then she reached for her phone, showing me the video we'd taken. Still want to send it? She asked, her voice hesitant. I stared at the screen, my emotions a whirlwind of anger, regret, and something else I couldn't quite put a name to. Yes, I finally said. Let them feel what it's like. She hit send,